On a cold October evening in 2007, in a small town in the middle of Iowa, a chain-link fence outside a factory was covered in work boots. Dozens of them, hanging by their laces, lying on the sidewalk where men had dropped them and walked away, steel-toed, cracked, worn into the shape of the feet that had lived in them for 20 years, for 30 years, for a lifetime. Nobody organized it. Nobody planned it. The men who came out of that building on the last day just took off their boots and left them there. Hold on to that image. We'll come back to it. Because this is the story of the most famous promise in the history of American advertising. A promise made by a man in a blue uniform, sitting alone by a telephone that never rang. You remember him, the Maytag repairman, the loneliest guy in America. He had nothing to do, and that was the whole point. Maytag machines never broke. That's why he was bored. That's why he was sad. That was the joke, and it ran for 40 years, and America believed every word of it. And then everything broke. The machines, the company, the town, all of it. This is the story of how a company that sold one word, dependability, stopped being dependable, and what that cost the 4,000 people who bled Maytag blue. It starts, like a lot of American stories, with a man who wasn't trying to change anything. In 1893, in Newton, Iowa, a man named Fred Maytag and 3 partners started building attachments for threshing machines, farm equipment, practical, unglamorous work for practical, unglamorous people. Farm equipment has a problem, though. It's seasonal. Come winter, the orders dry up, the machines sit idle, and a man with a factory and no work starts looking for something, anything, to build.
So, during one of those slow winters, Fred Maytag started making washing machines. It was a side project, a way to keep the lights on until spring. That side project would eventually employ a quarter of his town. Now, here's something almost nobody knows. Newton, Iowa was not an accident. In the early years of the 20th century, that little Iowa town called itself the washing machine capital of the world. And it wasn't bragging. There were half a dozen washing machine companies there. By some counts, as many as 9, all of them fighting over the same American housewife, all of them promising to end the misery of laundry day. One by one, they died. Every single one. Except Maytag. Why? Because Fred Maytag was building something a little heavier, a little better, a little harder to break. In the 1920s, Maytag became the first to build a washing machine body out of cast aluminum. It was expensive, it was overbuilt, and people loved it because it lasted. And here you can already see the shape of the whole story, because Maytag had just discovered the thing it would sell for the next 80 years. Not a machine, a feeling. The feeling that this thing will not let you down. Then came the 1950s and the boom, and the moment Maytag had to decide what it wanted to be. Because suddenly everybody was in the appliance business. Whirlpool, General Electric, Westinghouse, Frigidaire, giants. And they didn't just build washers, they built refrigerators, stoves, dryers, everything, all under one roof, all at massive scale. Maytag was small. It could not outproduce them. It could not outspend them. It could not out-advertise them. So it made a decision that was either brilliant or suicidal, and it would take 50 years to find out which.
Maytag would not try to build everything. It would build washers and dryers, and it would build them better than anyone else on Earth. It would be the premium name, the one you saved up for, the one that cost more because it was worth more. The company was so committed to this idea that it did something that sounds like a joke but is completely true. It renamed the street address of its own headquarters, 1 Dependability Square. That was the address. That was the whole company, printed on an envelope. And in 1967, an advertising man in Chicago turned that one word into the most valuable idea Maytag would ever have. His name was Vince Vasolo, a copywriter at Leo Burnett, and he came up with a character so simple it's almost stupid. A repairman, in uniform, with his tools, sitting in an empty office, waiting and waiting. Nobody calls. Nobody ever calls, because Maytag machines don't break. They cast a character actor named Jesse White, a man with one of those faces you'd seen 100 times and never known the name of. And for 21 years, Jesse White sat there on your television, slumped in a chair, staring at a telephone, the loneliest man in America. The ads even said it out loud. His misery is your proof. Now think about what that campaign actually accomplished. It didn't sell features. It didn't sell horsepower or capacity or a bigger drum. It sold you the absence of a problem. It gave you permission to pay more because you'd never have to pay again. And America bought it completely. Maytag charged a premium and got it. In the high end of the laundry aisle, it wasn't even a fight. The campaign ran in one form or another for about 40 years. Jesse White, then Gordon Jump.
The Repairman even got a dog, a basset hound, and they named the dog Newton after the town. Think about that. The company's mascot had a mascot, and the mascot's dog was named after the town where the workers lived. Because in Newton, Iowa, there was no line between the company and the community. There never had been. There was a Maytag park, a Maytag concert bowl. The family name was everywhere, on everything. At its peak, that factory employed around 4,000 people, in a town of 16,000. Do the arithmetic. Roughly 1 in 4 people in that town worked for Maytag. And the plant they worked in was enormous, 2 million square feet. Reporters trying to describe it landed on this. It was about the size of 7 Walmarts. The workers had a phrase for themselves. If you cut them, they said, they'd bleed Maytag blue. That's not a slogan a marketing department wrote. That's what people say when a company is not their employer, but their identity. And for 100 years, it held. So what went wrong? The answer is simple and almost unbearable. Maytag stopped being dependable. At the end of the 1990s, Maytag introduced a new front-loading washing machine called the Neptune. On paper, it was the future, more efficient, advanced, the next generation. In practice, customers had problems and complaints spread. Now, in 1975, that wouldn't have mattered much. An unhappy customer told his neighbor, maybe his brother-in-law. The story died at the end of the driveway. But this was happening in the early 2000s, and something had changed that Maytag's leadership did not understand: the internet. For the first time in human history, one furious customer with a broken washing machine could tell 10,000 strangers about it before dinner.
The word of mouth that had taken Maytag 100 years to build could now be turned against it in about 18 months. And it was. The one thing Maytag sold, the only thing it had ever really sold, was the promise that you would never have to think about your washing machine. And now, people were thinking about their washing machines constantly, angrily, publicly. By 2005, Maytag's market share had fallen to all-time lows. Customer satisfaction surveys, the very thing the company had built its identity on, now ranked Maytag near the bottom of the entire appliance industry. Sit with that for a second. The dependability company, near the bottom. And in 2007, the Consumer Product Safety Commission announced a nationwide recall of 250,000 Neptune washing machines. The reason given was the risk of fire. The lonely repairman was not lonely anymore. A company with a factory and a fleet and 100 products can survive a bad year, but a company whose entire moat is a reputation has nothing left when the reputation goes. Maytag was small on purpose, premium on purpose, and now the premium was gone, and small was just small. The company started losing money, and in the world of American business, a wounded company with a beloved name is not a tragedy, it's an opportunity. In 2005, the Chinese appliance giant Haier, backed by American private equity, made a bid to buy Maytag, $1.28 billion. That bid failed, and the company that got it instead was the giant Maytag had spent 50 years refusing to become. Whirlpool bought Maytag for $1.7 billion. The deal closed on the 1st of April, 2006. The people of Newton had 39 days to hope.
On the 10th of May, 2006, Whirlpool announced that it would close the Maytag headquarters in Newton, Iowa, and the plant. The washers and dryers would be built somewhere else, in Ohio, at non-union factories where the wages were significantly lower, and in Mexico. Whirlpool's explanation was not cruel, it was just corporate. The business was broken, they said. The company could not invest in modernizing this particular facility. Their commitment was to best cost, best quality, best distribution. And that mix, whatever it was, did not include Newton, Iowa. Now here is the detail I cannot get out of my head. In April of 2007, with the factory already scheduled to die, Maytag held auditions and hired a brand new Maytag repairman, a man named Clay Jackson from Virginia, the new face of Old Lonely. And when they announced it, he said it was an exciting time for Maytag. 6 months later, they closed the factory. And there was another repairman in this story, a real one. She wanted the closure. Another man, 34 years on that floor, called it a nightmare. A woman with 22 years said she watched grown men crying in the parking lot. And on their way out, they walked past the chain-link fence. And they took off their boots. And they hung them there. Steel-toed work boots, dozens of them, laced together and slung over the fence of the factory that had fed their families for 100 years. Some just left them on the sidewalk. Nobody told them to do it. It just happened, the way things happen when there's nothing left to say. 3 years later, a national news crew came to Newton and reported that of all the broken towns they had seen in America, none of them looked quite as broken as this one. And this is where most documentaries about a dead factory would stop, on the boots, on the ruin, fade to black. But Newton didn't die. The town went out and fought for itself. Its leaders made a simple pitch to anyone who would listen. We have the buildings, we have the infrastructure, and we have a workforce that knows how to build things. And somebody listened. A company that builds blades for wind turbines came to Newton, helped along by about $8 million in loans and grants and tax breaks. It started with a handful of workers. It grew past 1,000. Today, they turn out around 27 enormous wind blades a week in that town. Unemployment in Newton hit nearly 10% after the crash. Today, it's a fraction of that. So it's a happy ending, right? Not quite. And this is the part nobody puts in the press release. Back in 2001, manufacturing work in that county paid about 37% above the Iowa average. Those were Maytag wages. That was the middle class. In one county, built by one factory. By 2015, manufacturing work in that same county paid about 20% below the state average. The jobs came back. The paychecks didn't. The town survived. The standard of living did not. And that, more than any statistic, is the real story of what happened to American manufacturing towns. Not that they all became ghost towns. Most of them didn't. They just quietly got poorer, and kept smiling, and kept working, and nobody outside noticed. About a mile north of where the Maytag headquarters used to stand, there's a cemetery. And in a family mausoleum in that cemetery lies Fred Maytag, the man who started building washing machines in a slow winter because his farm equipment business had nothing to do. He built a company on a single promise, that the thing he made would not let you down. For 100 years, it didn't. The company still exists in a way. You can buy a Maytag today. It'll be made in Ohio or Mexico or somewhere else. The name is owned by the giant that Maytag spent half a century refusing to become. The address, 1 Dependability Square, doesn't lead anywhere anymore. And the lonely repairman, that sad, patient man in the blue uniform, waiting by a telephone that never rang, turned out to be the most honest advertisement ever made. Because in the end, he really did lose his job. Just not the way anybody expected. The boots are gone now. Somebody took them down eventually. But if you talk to the people who were there, they'll tell you the same thing, in almost the same words. They didn't leave them as a protest. They left them because those boots had a place, and a purpose, and a factory to walk into every morning. And on that Thursday, they didn't anymore.